Okay, let's unpack this. There are some stories, that just capture the collective imagination. They refuse to let go, no matter how many decades pass.
Absolutely.
We're talking about figures like Marilyn Monroe. Her name alone brings up images of Hollywood glamour, sure, but also talent, and tragically, this enduring mystery.
Yeah, it's a potent mix.
So today we're doing a deep dive into the circumstances surrounding her death. Our mission here is to try and cut through some of the noise. We've got a ton of source material, official reports, investigations, decades of speculation.
Right, so much stuff out there.
And we want to uncover the pivotal moments, maybe some surprising details, and look at the questions that have really haunted this case for, over 60 years now?
Yeah, easily.
We'll be sifting through the facts, the official investigations, and of course the many, many conspiracy theories that popped up.
And it's really important to remember, like, even with the official rulings, there were factual discrepancies, unanswered questions. Even the LA County DA's office admitted that back in their 82 review.
Right, that 1982 review.
Yeah. So our goal is just to give you a really comprehensive, impartial look at what the sources actually tell us. Let you think critically about all the information.
Okay, so let's begin right at the very end. Marilyn Monroe, found dead, morning of Sunday, August 5th, 1962. She was only 36.
Just 36.
In her home in Brentwood, Los Angeles. Officially, it was a barbiturate overdose.
And her housekeeper, Eunice Murray, she's the one who found her before dawn that Sunday.
But to really understand that discovery, we kind of need to backtrack through her last full day, right? Saturday, August 4th. The sources paint a picture of, a fairly typical day for her, at least on the surface.
Yeah.
She met with photographer Lawrence Schiller.
Yeah, had a massage, took some phone calls, signed for deliveries, that sort of thing.
And her publicist, Patricia Newcomb, she'd actually stayed overnight because Marilyn hadn't been sleeping well.
Right. And Newcomb remembered a pretty heated argument with Marilyn that morning.
Okay. So by the afternoon, things seemed a bit more structured, maybe reflecting her ongoing struggles.
Yeah, I think so. Her psychiatrist, Dr. Ralph Greenson, he arrived about 4:30 p.m. for a therapy session.
And he asked Newcomb to leave.
He did, yeah, during the session. And before Greenson left, around 7 p.m., he specifically asked Murray, the housekeeper, to stay overnight, keep Marilyn company.
Okay. Then the phone call started coming in. Around 7:07 for 1 p.m., Joe DiMaggio Jr. called.
And he said later he didn't notice anything alarming in her behavior then.
But then she called Greenson, her psychiatrist, between 7:40 and 7:45.
Yeah, apparently to tell him some news about DiMaggio Jr.'s breakup.
And this is where things start to take a really different, unexpected turn.
Absolutely. Because later that evening, Peter Lawford calls, actor Peter Lawford, President Kennedy's brother-in-law.
Right.
And he said she sounded heavily under the influence, slurring her words.
What'd she say?
Something chilling, really. She told him, say goodbye to Pat, say goodbye to the president, and say goodbye to yourself because you're a nice guy. And then she just seemed to drift off.
Wow. Okay, so Lawford must have been alarmed.
Extremely. He tried calling her back, couldn't get through. Then he called his agent, who tried Greenson, no luck there either. Finally, he reached Marilyn's lawyer, Mickey Rudin.
And Rudin.
Rudin called the house and spoke to Eunice Murray, the housekeeper, who assured him Marilyn was fine.
But she wasn't fine.
Yeah.
Not at all.
No. Murray eventually made the discovery around 3:30 a.m. Sunday morning.
How did she find her?
She said she woke up just sensing something was wrong, saw the light under Marilyn's locked bedroom door, couldn't get a response.
So she looked through a window?
Yeah, and saw her lying face down on the bed, naked, covered only by a sheet, clutching a telephone receiver.
Chilling.
Greenson arrived pretty quickly after Murray called him. He actually had to break a window to get into the locked room.
He broke the window himself?
Yes. Confirmed she was dead, and then called her physician, Dr. Hyman Engelberg.
And the police. When were they finally called?
Not until 4:25 a.m., which, you realize is several hours after Murray first found her, and even longer after that Lawford call.
Yeah, that time gap has always been a point of contention, hasn't it?
Definitely.
So, okay, the police arrive, the investigation begins. What did the official autopsy find?
Deputy Coroner Thomas Noguchi did the autopsy on August 5th, the same day she was found.
Noguchi, right. Famous name in forensic pathology.
Very much so. Based on the rigor mortis, he estimated the time of death between 8:30 p.m. and 10:30 p.m. the previous night, Saturday the 4th.
And the cause of death.
The toxicology was key, acute barbiturate poisoning. They found 8 mg% of chloral hydrate and 4.5 milligram% of pentobarbital nembutal in her blood.
And in her liver.
Another 13 milligram% of pentobarbital in the liver. These are very high levels.
Lethal levels.
Oh, yes, several times over the lethal limit. And they found empty medicine bottles right next to her bed. Crucially, Noguchi reported no signs of external wounds or bruises.
So based on that, what was the final official verdict?
On August 17th, Chief Coroner Theodore Curfey classified her death as a probable suicide.
Probable suicide, not accidental.
They specifically ruled out accidental overdose. The reasoning was the sheer amount of drugs in her system. They believed the doses were taken in one gulp or in a few gulps over a minute or so, which suggests intent. And psychiatrists from the LA Suicide Prevention Center assisted the inquest. They pointed to her history.
Her known struggles.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Long history of psychiatric issues, severe fears, depression, those unpredictable mood swings. She knew sedative drugs, knew their dangers.
And she had attempted suicide before.
Yes, crucially, she had made attempts in the past, but had often called for help and been rescued.
So the experts thought.
They concluded, and this is a direct quote, "It is our opinion that the same pattern was repeated on the evening of August 3, except for the rescue."
Except for the rescue. Wow.
They also highlighted that empty nembutal bottle. The prescription for 25 capsules had been filled just the day before.
25 capsules gone in a day.
And the locked bedroom door. That was seen as significant. Unusual for her, apparently. These details really framed it as a deliberate, isolated act in the official report.
It paints a very bleak picture, but one that, as you said, left many questions. To get a fuller picture, maybe we need to look at the context, the years leading up to 62.
Definitely. The sources show she'd been dependent on amphetamines, barbiturates, alcohol for years.
It wasn't just addiction, though, was it? Deep depression, anxiety, low self-esteem, chronic insomnia.
All documented. And it affected her work. She gained a reputation, rightly or wrongly, for being difficult, causing production delays.
And there was that other layer of scrutiny, too, wasn't there? The political angle.
Yeah, that's a lesser-known detail, but really important. The FBI had a file on her going back to 1956.
Why?
Because of her relationship with Arthur Miller, her then-husband, who was accused of being a communist, so she was under government watch to some extent.
In her career in the early 60s. It was struggling.
He really was. She got passed over for breakfast at Tiffany's. Let's make love and them couple.
The Misfits filming was notoriously difficult for her.
Incredibly so. She even spent a week in a hospital detoxing during the shoot. And then, January 61, her marriage to Miller ended. Divorce.
So a lot of personal turmoil.
And health problems, too. 1961 was rough. Surgery for endometriosis, gallbladder removal. She spent 4 weeks in hospital care.
Including that stint in a mental ward.
Yeah, a brief one for depression. It just underscores the immense pressure she was under personally, medically. Made her very vulnerable.
And then came that very public firing from Something's Gotta Give in June 62.
20th Century Fox really threw her under the bus publicly, blamed her entirely, even called her mentally disturbed.
But that wasn't the whole story, was it?
Not at all. Fox's version went mostly unchallenged for decades. But then in 1990, surviving footage came out.
And it showed.
It showed she was actually coherent on set, performing well in many takes. It turns out her dismissal was likely tied just as much, if not more, to the studio's own deep financial problems and, frankly, an inexperienced executive making the call.
Interesting how narratives can solidify like that.
Yeah. But despite all that, she was fighting back in her own way, trying to repair her image.
How?
Giving interviews to big magazines, Life, Cosmopolitan, Vogue, right in those weeks before she died. Trying to control her own story.
And of course, that happy birthday performance for JFK in May 62.
Iconic. But it caused a massive stir, didn't it? Fueled all that affair speculation.
And definitely got the attention of government agents again, you imagine.
No doubt.
So here's the thing that's always struck me as conflicting. Despite all this chaos, the firing, the personal issues, you're saying our sources show she was actively renegotiating her Fox contract.
That's right. And had plans for future films. What a way to go. Maybe a Jean Harlow biopic.
See, that just doesn't quite fit the picture of someone definitively planning suicide, does it? It really complicates the narrative.
It absolutely does. And that inherent contradiction, that ambiguity, is really what opened the door for all the alternative theories that followed.
Right. The official story was out there, probable suicide, but for a lot of people, it just didn't add up. Too many loose ends, maybe.
Or just too hard to accept for such a vibrant figure. That void filled up quickly with speculation, some of it pretty wild.
And these alternative theories started emerging quite early, didn't they? Mid-60s.
Yeah, suggesting murder or maybe an accidental overdose that was covered up, and they often involved big names.
Like the Kennedys, JFK and RFK.
Them, yes, but also figures like Jimmy Hoffa, the union boss, and mobster Sam Giancana, powerful people.
Where did the first actual murder allegations come from?
Well, the first really direct claim came from an anti-communist activist named Frank A. Capel. He self-published a pamphlet in 1964.
The strange death of Marilyn Monroe, wasn't it?
That's the one! Capel claimed it was all a communist conspiracy. He alleged an affair between Marilyn and Robert Kennedy.
Okay.
And claimed RFK ordered her killed after she threatened to expose it, cause a scandal. He even accused people close to her doctors, Arthur Miller, of being communist too.
Okay, but how credible is Capel?
Well, there were major issues. His main source for a lot of it was a columnist, Walter Winchell.
Who apparently got a lot of his info from Capel himself.
Exactly. He was essentially citing himself. It was circular. And then you have LAPD Sergeant Jack Clemens.
The first officer on the scene.
Right. He helped Capel. And later, Clemens started making new claims that weren't in his original 1962 police report. Things like seeing the housekeeper washing sheets, having a sixth sense something was wrong. Stuff he hadn't mentioned at the time.
Sounds convenient.
And you really have to look at the political context. Capel and Clemens had clear motivations. Capel spent his life trying to expose what he called the international communist conspiracy.
And Clemens was involved in similar groups.
Yes, organizations trying to expose subversive activities. Both were known for being strongly anti-Kennedy.
Didn't they get into legal trouble themselves?
They did. In 1965, Capel, Clemens, and another person were actually indicted for conspiracy to libel a U.S. senator, basically plotting to spread damaging lies about him. That context is pretty important when weighing their claims about Monroe.
Definitely puts it in perspective. So, okay, that's the 60s. How did these theories evolve into the 70s?
This started hitting the mainstream more. Norman Mailer's big biography, Marilyn, came out in 1973.
Mailer? Major literary figure. What did he say?
Well, he repeated the RFK affair claim, though he admitted he didn't have concrete evidence. And he speculated that maybe the FBI or CIA killed her.
Why would they do that?
His theory was they wanted to use her murder as leverage, a point of pressure against the Kennedys.
Wow. But did Mailer stick by that?
Well, here's the twist. He later went on 60 Minutes with Mike Wallace and basically took it all back.
He recanted.
Completely. Said he made the allegations mostly for commercial success to sell books. He admitted he actually believed her death was, quote, 10-1 an accidental suicide.
That's quite an admission. Making murder claims for book sales.
It's pretty shocking, isn't it? And a stark reminder, really, for you listening, always question the motives behind these narratives, even from famous authors. Money can be a powerful driver.
Absolutely. But even with Mailer backing down, the theories didn't stop, did they?
None at all. In 1975, you get Robert F. Slatzer's book. He doubled down on the RFK murder claim and added this really controversial assertion that he'd been secretly married to Marilyn for 3 days back in 1952.
A secret marriage. That sounds unlikely.
It wasn't widely believed then, but Slatzer's claims became kind of foundational for a lot of later theories.
And then came Anthony Scaduto.
Right. 1975 article, 1976 book. He relied heavily on Slatzer and a private investigator named Milo Speraglio.
What does Scaduto add?
He alleged Marilyn kept a red diary, like a secret book filled with confidential political stuff she got from the Kennedys.
The famous Red Diary.
Okay, and he claimed her house was wiretapped by a surveillance guy named Bernard Spindle, supposedly on orders from Jimmy Hoffa.
Hoffa wanted dirt on the Kennedys.
That was the allegation. So you see how the story keeps escalating, getting more complex, more conspiratorial. But the question becomes, how reliable was any of this? Did the authorities ever look into it again?
They eventually had to, right? With all this noise.
Yeah, by the early 80s, the pressure mounted. Especially after Milo Speraglio published his own book in 1982, Marilyn Monroe, Murder Cover-Up.
What was Speraglio's angle?
He claimed Hoffa and mob boss Sam Giancana ordered the murder, and he brought in testimony from a guy named Lionel Grandison.
Who was he?
A former employee at the coroner's office. Grandison claimed he saw extensive bruising on Marilyn's body that was left out of the autopsy report, and that he saw the red diary before it vanished.
Okay, those are serious claims. bruising, a missing diary.
Very serious. And Spiriglio and Slatzer were demanding the case be reopened.
So that led to the 1982 DA review.
Exactly. The Los Angeles District Attorney launched what they called a threshold investigation, basically a reevaluation to see if there was enough credible evidence to warrant a full new investigation.
And the result?
They found no credible evidence supporting murder. None.
What about Grandison's claims? The bruises, the diary?
Grandison was found to be completely unreliable. Turns out he'd been fired from the coroner's office for stealing from corpses.
Oh, well, that certainly damages his credibility.
To say the least. And the wiretap claims from Scaduto and Spiriglio also debunked. Bernard Spindle's actual tapes had been seized years earlier in 1966.
Right.
And they simply didn't contain anything supporting the idea he'd wiretapped Marilyn's house for Hoffa or anyone else. The claims just didn't hold up under scrutiny.
So the official review in '82 found nothing to support the murder theories. But did that stop them?
Not really. The public fascination was still huge. And in 1985, British journalist Anthony Summers published Goddess, The Secret Lives of Marilyn Monroe.
Goddess, that was a massive bestseller, wasn't it?
Huge. And Summers proposed yet another theory, not quite murder, but accidental overdose enabled and then covered up by Robert Kennedy.
Okay, how did that supposedly work?
Summers painted a picture of Marilyn being severely unstable, even psychotic, in her final months. He repeated the affairs with both Kennedy's claim and said she threatened to expose them when RFK broke it off. Summers alleged Kennedy and Peter Lawford were actually enabling her addictions.
Enabling them.
Yes, and that she accidentally overdosed. But here's the cover-up part. He claimed she actually died in an ambulance en route to the hospital.
Died in the ambulance, so the scene at the house.
Was staged, according to Summers. He alleged her body was brought back to her bedroom, and Lawford, the Kennedys, maybe even J. Edgar Hoover, staged it to look like a suicide.
Why? What was the motive for the cover-up?
To prevent RFK, then Attorney General, from being publicly linked to her death and the surrounding scandal. It's a very dramatic narrative.
Extremely. But how solid was Summers' evidence? Was his theory investigated?
Well, it faced significant criticism from other serious biographers, people like Donald Sputto, Sarah Churchwell.
What did they say?
They pointed out contradictions in Summers' own account, instances where he seemed to present false information or misrepresent sources. And they noted he relied heavily on speculation and second or third-hand accounts from people already known to be controversial witnesses.
Like Sonia Clemens?
Like Clemens, yeah. And a woman named Jean Carmen, whose actual closeness to Marilyn is disputed. So a lot of questionable sources underpinning the theory.
Still, it was influential. Didn't it lead to documentaries?
It did. It was the basis for a BBC documentary, and ABC's 2020 was planning a segment too.
But that 2020 piece never aired.
No. ABC reportedly felt the claims needed more solid proof. Summers himself claimed it was Kennedy family pressure that killed the segment. So, more controversy.
It just never ends, does it? And the 90s just saw more of the same.
Pretty much. New books came out claiming murder, but they mostly just recycled the same sources that had already been discredited by the '82 investigation or questioned by other biographers.
Okay, but then Donald Spotto, who you mentioned, criticized Summers. He came out with his own theory in his 1993 biography.
Right. Spotto disputed the murder theories, but he didn't accept the probable suicide verdict either. He argued it was an accidental overdose.
Accidental.
Yes, but one that was then staged to look like a suicide by her doctors and housekeeper.
Staged by Greenson and Murray. Why?
Spotto claimed Marilyn had combined Nembutal, which he alleged she got by lying to another doctor, with a chloral hydrate enema that Greenson had prescribed. He believed this combination was accidentally fatal.
And the staging.
He argued Greenson and Murray panicked and staged the scene to cover up their potential roles in her death, maybe medical malpractice. He based this on alleged inconsistencies in their statements, a disputed claim about someone being alerted to her death earlier than reported, and this brings us to John Miner.
Ah, the prosecutor. Miner claimed there were signs of an enema in the autopsy.
Miner made that claim, yes, which Spotto used to support his theory.
Okay, so that brings us into the 2000s, and John Miner's claims start getting a lot more attention.
They really do. Miner starts talking about these supposed transcripts he made from audio tapes Marilyn recorded shortly before her death.
The lost tapes. What did Miner say was on them?
He claimed they proved she wasn't suicidal at all, said she was talking about future plans, projects, seemed hopeful.
Okay, that sounds like bombshell evidence, if true.
But big buts. Huge skepticism surrounded Miner from the start. For one, he'd mentioned the tapes to investigators back in '82, but never said anything about having made transcripts then.
Why not?
He claimed Greenson, her psychiatrist, had sworn him to secrecy about the transcripts. Conveniently, Greenson was dead by the time Miner went public with this, and the tapes themselves never found.
So just his word and transcripts nobody else ever saw or heard recordings of.
Exactly. And biographer Lois Banner did a deep dive into Miner himself. What she found was pretty damning.
Like what?
Miner had lost his law license. He'd apparently lied about working for the Kinsey Institute. He went bankrupt right before he tried to sell these alleged transcripts, and he admitted writing them decades after he supposedly listened to the tapes. Memory is tricky, you know?
Decades later. That's not ideal for accuracy.
Not at all. And here's where Banner's research got really provocative, shedding light on Miner's potential agenda.
Go on.
Miner's central theory, supporting Spoto's idea, was that Marilyn was killed by that chloral hydrate enema administered by Eunice Murray, whom Miner falsely claimed was a registered nurse.
Okay, but Banner found.
Banner found zero evidence to support the fatal enema theory, but she did uncover evidence suggesting Miner had, well, a personal obsession with enemas and was involved in sadomasochism.
Oh, okay.
Banner concluded his theory likely represented his sexual interests more than any actual evidence from the case.
That raises a huge red flag, doesn't it? How do you, as someone trying to understand this, separate potential truth from manipulation when the source might have such a hidden and frankly disturbing agenda?
It's incredibly difficult, and it really highlights a need for rigorous source checking and understanding the messenger as well as the message.
Yet, despite all these serious concerns about Miner's credibility, someone published his transcripts.
Yes. Matthew Smith, in his 2003 book, Victim, The Secret Tapes of Marilyn Monroe, he presented Miner's transcripts as real.
And Smith theory.
Smith took it even further. He asserted the CIA murdered Monroe as revenge against the Kennedys, somehow related to the Bay of Pigs invasion.
Okay, that's quite a leap. How was that received?
Not well by serious researchers. Sarah Churchwell called Smith's book a tissue of conjecture, speculation, and pure fiction presented as documentary fact. She argued it was probably the least factual of all the books about Marilyn, largely due to a severe lack of footnotes or verifiable sources, just assertion piled on assertion.
So after all these wild theories, decades of them, is there a more grounded perspective, maybe from the family?
Well, in 2012, Marilyn's niece, Mona Ray Miracle, spoke out. She flatly denied all the conspiracy theories.
What did she believe happened?
She pointed out that Marilyn had a full schedule of appointments for August 5th, the day she was found. She even mentioned plans Marilyn had to remarry Joe DiMaggio. Her conclusion was simple. It was just a tragic accident.
An accident. Back to one of the possibilities the coroner ruled out. Interesting.
It shows how even those closest can hold different views from the official findings without necessarily resorting to elaborate conspiracies.
Let's shift now to the immediate aftermath. The public reaction must have been immense.
Oh, absolutely overwhelming. Her death was front-page news everywhere. U.S., Europe, dominated headlines for days.
And there's that often cited statistic.
Yeah, the claim that the suicide rate in Los Angeles actually doubled in the month after she died. Whether precisely true or not, it speaks to the profound impact. The Chicago Tribune reported getting hundreds and hundreds of calls from the public wanting information.
What about reactions from people who knew her, worked with her?
They reflected the tragedy and the pressure she faced. Jean Cocteau, the French filmmaker, said her death should be a terrible lesson about how stars are tormented. Laurence Olivier called her the complete victim of ballyhoo and sensation.
And Joshua Logan, who directed her in Bus Stop.
He called her one of the most unappreciated people in the world, a real sense of loss and maybe some guilt from the industry.
Her funeral, when and where was that held?
August 8th, just a few days after her death, at the Westwood Village Memorial Park Cemetery.
Was it a big Hollywood affair?
No, quite the opposite. It was arranged by Joe DiMaggio, her half-sister Bernice, and her business manager Inez Melson. Very private. Only about 30 close family and friends were invited.
DiMaggio specifically excluded most of Hollywood.
That's the story, yeah. He reportedly felt they had contributed to her troubles. Police had to be there just to manage the crowds of spectators outside. Even in death, she drew crowds.
What was the service like?
She was laid out in a green Emilio Pucci dress. Her longtime makeup artist, Alan Whitey Snyder, did her makeup one last time. Lee Strasberg, her acting coach from the Actors Studio, delivered the eulogy. They played Tchaikovsky's Sixth Symphony, The Pathetique, and Judy Garland's Over the Rainbow.
Over the Rainbow. Fitting in a way. Where was she interred?
In crypt number 24. in the corridor of Memory's mausoleum. And the detail that always gets me is,
The roses from DiMaggio.
yeah. Joe DiMaggio arranged for 6 red roses to be delivered to her crypt 3 times a week for the next 20 years.
20 years. That's incredible devotion. A silent statement, really, amidst all the noise.
It really is. And speaking of who rests nearby, another surprising detail.
Hugh Hefner.
Hugh Hefner paid $75,000 back in 1992 for the crypt right next to hers.
What did he say about it?
His quote was, "Spending eternity next to Marilyn is an opportunity too sweet to pass up. Make of that what you will."
Indeed. Okay, so what about her actual estate? Her will? Who inherited?
Well, her will left specific cash amounts to her half-sister, Bernice, and her secretary, May Race. There was also a trust fund set up for her mother, Gladys, and for the widow of her acting coach, Michael Chekhov.
And the bulk of the estate?
25% went to her psychiatrist, Dr. Marianne Criss, not Greenson, to be used for psychiatric institutions or charities. And the largest share, 75%, including all her personal effects and future film royalties, went to Lee Strasberg.
Strasberg, her acting mentor.
Yes, but she included a specific instruction for him regarding her personal belongings. She asked him to distribute them among my friends, colleagues, and those to whom I am devoted.
Okay, so were her wishes honored? Did Strasberg distribute her things?
Well, first, due to legal issues and challenges to the will, none of the beneficiaries actually got paid until 1971.
Almost a decade later.
Yeah, and then when Lee Strasberg himself died in 1982, everything he had inherited from Marilyn passed to his second wife, Anna Strasberg.
Anna Strasberg. And
She essentially took control of the Monroe legacy, and she did not distribute Marilyn's personal effects as Marilyn had requested in her will.
what did she do instead?
She held on to them for years. And then in 1999, she commissioned Christie's auction house to sell off a huge collection of Marilyn's belongings, dresses, furniture, awards, even her baby grand piano.
How much did that auction make?
A staggering $13.4 million. So quite contrary to Marilyn's expressed wish for her things to go to friends and colleagues.
And Anna Strasberg also started licensing her image.
Extensively. She turned Marilyn Monroe into a major commercial brand. There were also legal battles later on about publicity rights, whether Marilyn, dying in 1962, could even pass on rights that didn't legally exist in California until 1985. The courts eventually ruled she couldn't have. It just adds another layer of complexity to her legacy, showing how even after death, her story, her image, even her possessions were controlled and shaped by others.
So we've really journeyed through a lot here, from the official findings of probable suicide, grounded in toxicology and her history.
Right, but also acknowledging those persistent factual discrepancies and unanswered questions that the DA's office itself noted back in '82.
Through decades of intense speculation, conspiracy theories involving presidents, mobsters, the CIA.
Many fueled by individuals with questionable motives, unreliable sources, or sometimes, as we saw with Mailer, even admitted commercial interests.
We've unpacked the details of her final days, the context of her very real struggles with addiction, mental health, and fame.
And seen how different narratives emerged: accidental overdose, murder cover-ups, staged suicides, each trying to explain the inexplicable, the loss of someone so iconic.
It really seems that while the official findings point one way, the ambiguity, the unanswered questions, and perhaps the sheer unbelievability of such a bright star burning out so suddenly,
Combined with the sometimes dubious motivations of those pushing alternatives, just keeps fueling this fascination, doesn't it? It really drives home that idea that you need to understand the information, yes, but also critically examine where it's coming from and why.
Absolutely. It feels like ultimately Marilyn Monroe's death became this kind of blank canvas. People projected their own fears onto it, their beliefs, sometimes even their political agendas. So the final thought for you, our listeners, is this. What does this enduring obsession with Marilyn's death tell us about how we as a society process tragedy? How we cling to certain narratives, especially when it involves someone so famous, so scrutinized, so Marilyn?